What's up, everybody? Welcome into Shout, a Buffalo Bills football podcast. We are here at our monthly appearance at Wingnuts, and it is the new Wingnuts here on Genesee Street, right next to the airport. He's Ryan Talbot. I am Matt Parrino. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel as well if you're watching on YouTube. We're here with the man himself, the OG, the creator. What's up, Ed? How are you?
It's good to see you guys.
It's great to see you.
It's been more than a month.
It's great to be in here. I mean, we walked in yesterday and kind of took a little bit of a tour of the building, and it is just spectacular. Wingnuts finding a new way to take it to the next level.
Yeah, and let me start out by saying, hello, Wingnuts! I would like to start out by a list of thank yous. First of all, for the new building, thank you right to God himself for what Wingnuts has become. And thank yous to Matt and Ryan. Yay for them, right? Thank you to Jim and Paul and Chris and AJ and all the people that work here and all you customers. Thank you. All right. Are we ready for the story?
We're ready for the story. What do you got for us?
This story happened at the Millersport building last summer. We were doing a meet and greet with Freddie Jackson from the Bills. And we had met him before very briefly. He was in the banquet room signing everybody's toys, footballs, and what have you. And Alicia and I went into the banquet room to say hello. And he took one look at her and said, I hate you.
Oh, no.
I hate you. Every time I come in here, I gain weight. I can't stop eating these wings. We left the banquet room and went back to our chairs at the bar, and Alicia had this big grin on her face, and the bartender said, what's going on? And she said, he hates me. and we've been laughing about it ever since.
That's awesome.
Yes, thank you very much. So I thought you'd get a kick out of that.
I did. And Fred Jackson is one of the most down-to-earth former Bills.
Oh, my gosh, he's so wonderful.
Met. And we were actually just talking about another former Bill, Eric Wood, who was in the show or in the shop a couple months ago. Two guys that are just, they keep coming around, and there's a reason for it.
They are awesome. They really are. So I'm glad I got to know them.
All right, let's give it up for Ed. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.
All right.
Thanks, buddy. I appreciate you. What's up, Ryan? How you feeling?
Hey, I'm feeling great. Excited to be here at the new Wingnuts location. Packed house for our first shout episode here.
We're going to get into a lot of different things on this episode. We'll bring some fans up for a little Q&A at the end. I'm sure there's a lot of people in here just out for their average Saturday night and saying, what the heck is going on out there? Well, this is the Shout Bills podcast. We are live on all of your platforms. You can find us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify. Did I leave any out?
I don't think so. You pretty much hit them all.
So it's obviously we're turning the page, right? The Bills finished off their regular or their postseason a couple of weeks ago. We just got back from the combine. We're going to start to turn our attention to free agency and then the draft. But where we're going to start is what the Bills have started to do with these draft prospects. You put out a story on Syracuse.com. Some of the players they met with at the combine.
Yeah, listen, the combine is the first step in this draft process. Teams generally meet with just about every player there, formally or informally, but you have 45 formal interviews at the combine, 18-minute interviews where you get to do your due diligence on some of these prospects. And we've seen over the years a lot of the guys that the Bills meet with there. They're the players that you have the private workouts with. They're the players that you have the top 30 visits where they come into Buffalo. So this is a piece to the puzzle. And, you know, after the Super Bowl this past year, Matt, with the way the Philadelphia Eagles D-line dominated, it's no surprise that some really good defensive linemen were on Buffalo's visit list.
I want to get to the defensive linemen in a minute, but I want to start with the wide receiver position, because if you look across like the mock drafts that have started to pop up over the course of the last month, Matthew Golden, somebody that I talked to with Chris Trapasso out at the combine, he's popped up for the Bills in a lot of combine or in a lot of mock drafts. Here's the big problem, though. The Bills are picking at 30, and Matthew Golden today ran a 4.29 40-yard dash. And you think back to Xavier Worthy last year and how much his stock kind of skyrocketed at the combine. To me, in a weak wide receiver class with Matthew Golden running that number, we're probably talking about a top 15, top 20 draft pick, depending on who goes first at the receiver position.
Yeah, that 4.29 ran him right out of Buffalo's, any hopes of them drafting this player at pick 30. If they really were dedicated to going wide receiver, they'd have to trade up for a player like Golden now. You'd have to think that he's someone that's going to go in the top 20 range. Like you said, it's a weak class overall, not nearly as strong as previous years. So the Bills are going to have to maybe look for speed in the middle rounds of the draft if that's their MO this year in the offseason, and obviously address it in free agency as well.
I want to get to some of those defensive linemen that you were talking about, but what would be your opinion about something like this? I was talking to somebody at the Combine about an idea that I had for the Bills before we got to this part of the year, and that was maybe pursuing a trade for Chris Olave with the New Orleans Saints. And I know that probably raises your eyebrows. A lot of people were high on him during the draft prospect all those years ago. He's had some injuries in New Orleans. I think he probably wants to get out of there. The problem's going to be if you make a deal like that, you're going to have to give him a big-time contract. So you're going to have to figure out how that fits into the situation on your salary cap. But if the Bills want to go heavy in the draft on the defensive line, they brought in Ryan Nielsen to help develop some of these players at that position. I think you can maybe make a swing at Chris Olave, who I think his style, his skill set is exactly what the Bills are missing in their offense.
Skill set would be a great fit for the team. You'd want to look into the concussion history. Had a very serious one this past year. Obviously, Buffalo has the team neurologist. They can look into that, and if they felt comfortable, certainly a player that would be worth drafting. He was neck and neck a few years ago with Garrett Wilson in terms of who was going to go first. We've seen what Wilson has been able to do despite great quarterback play with the Jets, and we've seen Olave really flash at times too when healthy. So would be a great fit. With the way the Saints are, they are kind of in a tear-down mode. I don't know if they'll ever fully do that, but moving on from Olave would make sense.
I think the big piece, too, for me is if you're the Saints and you're looking at this logically, you got to go out and try to find your quarterback. Whether or not you stick with Carr or not, you're going to have to come up with a 3-year plan of tearing this thing down and then rebuilding it. And I don't think they're ever truly going to get back to a place of being competitive until they kind of just tear it all apart and just go that direction. And you bring up that point, and I want to say there was that same question when the Bills signed Mitch Morse in free agency a couple years ago. If you remember, a lot of people thought he might be on his last legs. He was a concussion away from maybe being out of the league. That's something that I think the Bills have already shown they have a track record of being able to kind of do their due diligence in that department and finding a player that it can impact the offense.
Yeah, absolutely. And Morse did suffer a few more concussions in his time with the Bills, and it didn't have any lingering effects, and he was a great contributor for them. So absolutely something that they can look at with players like Olave and anyone else that could come along in free agency this year.
All right, so let's get to this defensive lineman at the draft. We were having a couple conversations. Our guy AJ is walking around here, and he said he wants defensive line in the first round. So who kind of popped out for you that the Bills met with in Indianapolis?
Well, 3 defensive tackles right out of the gate, Matt. Kenneth Grant, he would be a guy that they would have to take in the first round at pick 30. There's also Jeremy Caldwell of Oregon and Alfred Collins of Texas. You know what they all have in common?
What?
330 pounds or more. Big guys, space eaters, a player that you want next to Ed Oliver, take on double teams. And they all are explosive athletes as well for their size. So they can get after the quarterback. They can stop the run. It's good looking at those 3 players specifically because it makes me realize the Bills know this is a weakness. This is an area where they watch, like I said earlier, Philadelphia dominate up front. They need a guy like that here in round 1.
So here's the one area of concern I have with this developing storyline. If you go back to the Kyrie Elam draft, what was Brandon Beane hearing all about in the months before that draft? Do you remember? What was it going into that draft? What was he hearing?
Just the need for a cornerback?
Yeah, go get a cornerback in the first round, no matter what. And I think when you run yourself into that kind of situation, now you're mentioning multiple names there, and I think Kenneth Grant is the kind of player that could pair perfectly for what they want to do with Ed Oliver, because Mason Graham is getting all this love, the Michigan 3-tech. Well, a lot of it had to do with the guy that he was playing next to, and he's even mentioned that a couple times during the draft process. So, sure, you do have to get a defensive tackle. All they heard this year was they weren't big enough on their defensive line. I actually asked Sean the question that got everybody kind of up in arms a little bit. They didn't like the question, but I think that it makes sense because of what size can do for an undersized player in Ed Oliver. to me, Grant would be the perfect situation. And he's one of the most polarizing players at the position because some people think he's a top 10 talent. Others think he might not even go in the first round.
Yeah, there are some that say he still needs to scratch the surface, hasn't reached to what he can be as a player at this point in time. So it's going to be interesting to see where he goes. But I do agree with you on one thing. They don't have to take a defensive tackle in round 1. This is a very deep D-tackle draft, both 1-tech and 3-tech. They could find a guy on day 2 where they have 2 other second-round picks. There's an edge rusher they looked at here, which we can get into in a minute. That could be a round 1 target in Mike Green. 17 sacks on the season. They could go cornerback as well because that's a pretty big weakness and need too when you look at the fact that they have Christian Benford. Rasul Douglas is about to hit free agency, and then there's a lot of question marks after that.
So let's get into let's switch gears to the defensive ends for a second because I spent a few minutes with Mike Green this week in Indianapolis, and you could tell that this is a guy that, first of all, former wrestler, that Sean McDermott probably absolutely loves that. We know his history there, but he's a guy that's got crazy bend off the edge and somebody that I think can be the replacement for Von Miller if the Bills decide to move off of him. Now, this is a guy that comes with his own set of baggage, right? Like he had a domestic violence incident in high school. He actually left Virginia because of a domestic violence accusation as well. So that's something that the Bills are going to have to be comfortable with to call his name. And that could be something that pushes him down in the draft. And then if you're the Bills, if you'd spend your time, bring him in for a top 30 visit and see if everything checks out, that could be insane value and somebody that you could pair with Greg Rousseau if you're not able to land a trade. And here's the other thing. Let's say they go Mike Green in the first round or somebody of that caliber to pair with Greg Rousseau, and a trade for a Max Crosby or Trey Hendrickson still materializes later in the summer or even into the season. Load up. I mean, you got the Eagles right now talking about trading for Myles Garrett with what I would consider to be one of the best defensive lines in the league. Now, they got a couple guys that are up for free agency, Milton Williams and Josh Sweat. They're going to have to reimagine that thing. But Howie Roseman's always shown that he's willing to take big-time swings, and I think Brandon Beane has to be willing to take maybe a couple.
Absolutely, and Brandon Beane met with a lot of different media outlets this week at the Combine, and he said that he and Sean McDermott both believe in building in the trenches, offensive line, defensive line. I don't think it's materialized, obviously, on the defensive line the way that they've wanted to. They've taken some swings. They they signed Von Miller, obviously. They've drafted a lot of guys, D tackles, and it just hasn't worked out. But when you look at the offensive linemen and the way that they've built that up and the depth there, they do have that vision. They do want to really go after it. So a guy like Mike Green, like we said, Josiah Stewart's another defensive end that they met with informally at the Combine, and then Arkansas DN Landon Jackson. So they're looking, they're evaluating. They have 10 picks in this draft. I would be stunned if they didn't address a few of them with defensive linemen.
Now, there's a couple other names that throw on people's radar. One in particular I talked with Trapasso about, Deion Walker out of Kentucky. He is an absolute freak, 6'7", 340 or something in that department. I really like that idea because you're getting a size profile that I think the Bills really have shown in the past that they gravitate towards. And he's a little bit of a game wrecker. He's good against the run, but he's also a penetrator. And I think that's the other skill set that if you're going to add a defensive tackle, especially high in the draft, I think you want him to be able to do both. Somebody that's going to help against the run. He's going to be able to eat up some space, but he's also going to be somebody you have to game plan for a little bit like a Tavondre Sweat. And I've already said my piece about him.
Yeah, and the Bills do need to do their due diligence on all these guys, middle round, late round gems, players that they can develop and bring along. So that's another player obviously in mind. And then if they're not going D-line in round 1, I would like them to look in the back end of the defense as well, cornerbacks and even safeties. There's some really good safeties in this draft class.
What's the top safety's name? And he ran an insane 40 today or a couple days ago.
He was insane in everything. Nick Amanawari. He was in the 92nd percentile or more in everything from height, weight, vertical, broad, and 40 times.
So I want to talk about him because to me, safety is a position that historically, you think about Kyle Hamilton, who was getting top 5 overall buzz the year that he came out. Brian Branch, same kind of concept, maybe not as high. If he's available in striking distance, I know the Bills have Taylor Rapp under contract. I know it's about to be Cole Bishop's season, but I like the idea of getting aggressive at the safety position and going out there and getting a guy that has the kind of speed profile that you could do multiple things with. It reminds you of a Cooper DeJean who could play nickel corner, but could also play safety.
3 guys that the Bills decided not to go after in the draft when they had their opportunities. And you've seen that Branch is just an absolute star for Detroit. Cooper DeJean has the flexibility to play cornerback and safety. The pick 6 in the Super Bowl there. And then Kyle Hamilton, I was a little biased because he was a Notre Dame player, but he's lived up to that hype and then some, despite falling a little bit in the draft further than I thought he would go.
Have you put your Chase Claypool Bills jersey on eBay yet, or is it still hanging up?
Hanging up.
Yeah. You're not getting rid of it?
No.
Okay. No. All right. I appreciate that. I was actually talking to somebody at the Combine about Claypool, and he's just kind of disappeared, like off the radar. I mean, apparently hasn't returned a couple of calls from some reporters, and a lot of people thought he was going to the CFL, and he might be just completely out of football. That's a pretty crazy story considering what he did his rookie season, and a Notre Dame guy.
Yeah, 2 strong seasons. Even this offseason with the Bills, he started out strong. Obviously, injuries have caught up to him in his career and caught up to him in Buffalo as well.
All right, we're here at Wingnuts, the new location right by the airport, connected right next to the Buffalo Airport Hotel. It is an awesome scene. TVs everywhere you look, drink specials, the best wings in Buffalo. It's a great time to come out here. There's a lot of times we do these live shows during the year at Bar and Grill, which is awesome. We're still going to be at both locations. But some people come in and be like, it's so popular, it's like a 2-hour wait to get in. Now there's 2 locations. If you go to that one and it's too long of a wait, come on over to the airport location.
Yeah, you can't go wrong. Both places serve the same outstanding food. I was just eyeing a plate of nachos that went by a minute ago that looked outstanding. Never had the nachos here, but that's another one on my list.
So, edge rusher, so much we've talked about on the podcast about Trey Hendrickson, Max Crosby, Myles Garrett, a potential swing in a trade. And the more we kind of go along here and, reading the tea leaves for all 3 of those situations, I don't know if anything necessarily materializes with any of those teams before the draft. And so if you're Brandon Beane, you're sitting here right now thinking, no matter what happens on that front, if I'm going to pursue a trade, I got to figure out this position. You have Von Miller, who's under contract, but maybe not for long. They get $17 million in cap space with a post-June 1st cut. And I just don't know if you want to sign up for another season of what he brings, the limitations on his game. One name that's been bantied about quite a bit on the text line, on the insider text line, and then on social media, Joey Bosa. And I wanted to have this conversation with you because when I first heard that name, the first thing that came to mind was definite no. He's always injured. I don't know if that's something you want to sign up for depending on the money. But if he does become available and he's willing to take a 1-year prove it kind of deal where it's very heavily incentive laden, is that something as opposed to maybe a Khalil Mack or a Matthew Judon? How do you view potentially going after Joey Bosa if he becomes a free agent and the Chargers move on?
So in the scenario you just laid out, that would probably be the only way I would say go after this guy. I'm not offering a multi-year deal. I'm not offering tons of guaranteed money because of the injury history. Now, sign up with a contender that can win the Super Bowl on a team-friendly deal with a lot of incentives, reset your market in the offseason. I'm all about that. I would never be opposed to something like that, but the injuries are what scares me from ever thinking about offering a multi-year deal. And in today's game, I still think there's going to be at least one team that tries to get him on a multi-year deal, just looking at the production when he is on the field.
Yeah, and I think if you're putting yourself in Bosa's shoes, you probably have to be aggressive in trying to get a multi-year deal because of the injury history. So I don't know if you'd be willing to risk it and take a 1-year deal, but I'm just trying to think about all of the other different options. I mean, you got like a Hassan Reddick who's out there who's probably, going to take a serious pay cut because of everything that happened in New York last year. The Khalil Mack idea is fun, the local story and everything like that, but he's still somebody I think is going to command quite a bit of money on the open market. He's the top pass rusher available.
Yeah, Reddick would just be fun because of the whole standoff that he had with the Jets and the fact that he really dug his heels in the sand, racked up a lot of fines that the Jets ultimately wiped away and didn't make him pay. But he didn't produce with the Jets, and maybe that was the lack of the offseason. Maybe it wasn't just a good fit. Maybe it's his age, but 1-year deal on a guy that has produced more times than not over the last 5 years, I wouldn't hate that idea because, again, I think that he lost a lot of money last year with the way that he played when he was on the field with New York.
Before we move on from the draft conversation, you mentioned cornerbacks. Who were some of the cornerbacks that the Bills met with? And beyond just specific players, in the draft, like, what do you think the Bills are going to prioritize? Are they going to look for a guy that has crazy, like, measuring athletic traits, or is it somebody that comes from a zone-specific scheme? Do they want somebody with more man background? Because they went that route with Kaiir Elam, and obviously it didn't quite work out.
Well, one of my favorite cornerbacks in this draft is Maxwell Hairston. Can play man and zone, tested extremely well. He's a player now that I think is going to be off the board for the Bills by pick 30, but stranger things have happened. So I don't think they necessarily look at man or like one or the other. They want to have a guy that can play both because they're going to mix it up a little bit. We saw they haven't been just exclusively zone the last few years. They've mixed man in at times, but those last two playoff games especially, they really saw an uptick in man defense against the Ravens, against the Chiefs. You want someone that can do both. And in terms of who they met with, the list here was Kansas's Mello Dotson, LSU cornerback Zy Alexander, Michigan cornerback Will Johnson, Ohio State's Denzel Burke, and Ole Miss cornerback Trey Amos.
So they're doing their due diligence. This
Absolutely.
is a position. It kind of tells you the story that maybe they don't get to the number that Rasul Douglas is probably looking for. And even if they do, I think you have to bring in somebody that you're willing to develop to maybe pair with Christian Benford, because I don't think you go into this offseason thinking Kaiir Elam is a long-term answer in any way. If he does come back on the roster, I think it's just to compete for a depth spot. But I could see a scenario where they bring him to camp, let him compete, and then maybe he doesn't make the final roster.
Yeah, it wouldn't even shock me if on day 3 of the draft this year, the Bills moved him for either a pick in this year's draft or even next year's draft. There's going to be a team that misses out on a corner that they're eyeing, and maybe this, whatever team that is, thinks that they can get the best of Elam, but he's never shown that in Buffalo. I think Buffalo does cut ties with him despite him being on a rookie deal, being pretty affordable. They've brought in a few different secondary coaches now. It just has not panned out in those moments when they've needed him to step up.
So obviously out in Indianapolis this week, we talked to Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane. Haven't met with you yet since both of those press conferences happened. What was your biggest takeaway from earlier this week? Obviously, I talked about it a little bit. I was pretty surprised at the rhetoric around Keon Coleman from Sean McDermott. I mean, obviously a lot of emphasis placed on a disappointing back half of the season for him, but Brandon Beane kind of played good cop the next day and said, all right, let's ease off this kid a little bit. Let's not throw him under the bus. He's a rookie. Let's give him a little bit of time to develop. But for you, big picture wise, what did you think was the most interesting thing from Indy?
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing was the fact that that Sean McDermott kind of did put Keon Coleman on alert. Like, you need to do your work this offseason, really come back, play a little bit more like the player pre-injury, because there was a striking difference in terms of the player pre-wrist injury, post-wrist injury. Even a little bit with Cole Bishop, too, in terms of getting onto the field, staying onto the field. You need to make sure you come in and work on whatever those 3-4 things that we tell you to work on in the offseason are. Make sure that you show up ready to come and play. So, McDermott's always, he said this week again, he's not against starting rookies, but you've got to earn it. And with these guys, they eventually got on the field. You saw some production out of them. But Keon Coleman really fell off at the end of the year, and he's not going to just play a guy just because he was a second-round pick. If other players outplay him this season, Coleman might lose some snaps.
We were talking before the start of the show, some big news in the NFL tonight. Deebo Samuel traded to the Washington Commanders. I want to get your first thoughts on this deal because, to me, if you're Washington and you kind of evaluate where things went wrong for you to end the season, I don't know if it was necessarily at the receiver position. I mean, Terry McLaurin was super electric. Yeah. They have a really good young running game. Jaden Daniels is so good. But I think it shows a willingness for the GM to add around a young quarterback and add another playmaker. To me, the Bills kind of already have their Deebo Samuel and Khalil Shakir, the run after the catch guy. They need to find their Terry McLaurin. Right,
absolutely. And this trade is a win-win for both teams. One, 49ers get that contract off the books, $20+ million. The Commanders have cap space. It's another weapon for a young quarterback in Jaden Daniels, who looked like a future star in the making this season. But I do agree with you. It wasn't their offense that was the issue this year in the playoffs. It was that defense giving up a 50-plus points to the Eagles in the NFC Championship game. So it doesn't address their biggest issue, but it also shows that they want the offense to keep evolving.
So a lot of people watching, 1,000 people across all the platforms, really enjoying the podcast, but they're also enjoying the breakdancing that's happening on the TV. All the way to my right here,
right.
Some really great commentary in the comment section. Some guys just pulled off some sick moves. So great observations. You probably have to zoom in on that a little bit to catch it, but they're enjoying it, so that's good. Where do you want to go next, buddy?
Not to breakdancing, Matt. Anywhere else?
You got game?
I do not.
Okay.
No, none.
All right, so where do you want to go next?
I guess the next thing is free agency. That's around the corner here, Matt. The Bills have a lot of guys. We can talk about some of their pending free agents. We can talk about some guys that they might want to try to lock up long-term like they did with Khalil Shakir, not a free agent. So right now, I guess my question to you is if the Bills make a move, what's it going to be next? Is it bring back a guy that's a potential free agent, or are they going to look to extend someone?
Well, you actually put out did you put out the story today, the report from Pauline?
Yes.
Okay, so why don't you tell everybody a little bit about that? And we can talk about that because he's going to be a cap casualty. That could be something the Bills do earlier.
Yeah, Bills supposedly are interested in Preston Smith, a veteran defensive end, pass rusher. He started his career with Washington, was in Green Bay for most of his career, and then was traded this past season to Pittsburgh. 4.5 sacks last season, but he's had 6 years where he's had 8 sacks or more. So he has produced. Not a premier player, not a guy at this stage in his career that's going to be a game wrecker. But in terms of depth, I don't hate the idea for Buffalo. It goes, like you said, no compensatory pick in the formula. He was cut by Pittsburgh as a cap casualty. So someone to kind of watch, maybe to fill like the Dwayne Smoot role.
Yeah, and I don't know if Dwayne Smoot's going to command a little bit more dollars on the market, and that's something that if you're Brandon Beane and you're starting to kind of feel that a little bit, being aggressive on a guy like Smith makes some sense, but that's all I'm considering this move for, like maybe a DE4 kind of role. But the more guys that you bring in like that, I feel like, you got Javon Solomon. I think you're going to be aggressive with 10 picks in this draft to go out and get another young edge rusher that you could develop in a class that's so deep. You might even land one at 30, and now you're talking about putting those guys in a position. One of the things for Sean McDermott that I've been critical of is that there isn't sometimes a situation for rookies where you allow them to kind of learn in game, right? Like everything's about training camp, and I get that. Cole Bishop misses a month of training camp. It's hard to put him out there in a game situation. But if you spend a day 1 or day 2 pick on an edge rusher, you better have a plan to play him when it matters.
Absolutely. And then bringing a guy like Preston Smith hypothetically in to teach them the ropes, to show them their pass rush arsenal, to have a mix of young guys and older guys there. It's a good problem to have. And they always talk about the importance of competition at training camp. And I think that the Bills are going to go best player available. They're not going to be stuck just going with only a defensive tackle or only an edge rusher. They're truly going to go with the best player on their board at pick 30, or maybe even get a little bit aggressive if there's someone that they feel had a higher grade on their board when the time comes.
Did you watch Brandon Beane on Pat McAfee show?
I saw a lot of the highlights.
So sitting next to him was Michael Lombardi, who's now the general manager of North Carolina. But for the last couple of years since he left the Patriots, he's been in the media, and he's had his own podcast. We actually had him on the podcast, our podcast. And what's funny is he's absolutely dumped on the Bills in so many different ways over the years, been ultra critical of Brandon Beane. And so like when he was coming out there, I was interested to see what the dynamic was going to be like. Totally different vibes.
Oh, yeah.
Like everything was like, oh, hey, Brandon, how's it going? And, oh, I like this, this, and this. And you've done a great job in the culture and this. And it's like, oh, we should bring up some of those little clips from over the last couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. A 180 from some of the things he's said and written about the team over the years. But sometimes when you're right there with someone you've criticized, you're going to put on a different game face, so to speak.
So we're going to bring up a fan in a little while that wants to talk about Christian Benford specifically. So I don't want to get to that yet. But in terms of the other three, James Cook, Greg Rousseau, and Terrell Bernard, do you think like any of those three are seriously on the table for this offseason? Or do you think that that's something that Brandon's going to have some of those introductory conversations, let it kind of percolate a little bit, unless the number blows him away. I don't think you're in a rush to do any of those three, maybe except for Terrell Bernard, because I think the number will be very Khalil Shakir-like.
Yeah, I will say this. James Cook's gone very public with what he's looking for. Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott were both still very complimentary of him, his importance to this team. They love him as a player. It would be a little bit of an upset maybe, but I guess I would probably go with James Cook beyond Christian Benford. Despite the contract demands, I don't see them giving him the $15 million per year, but I think you can find a middle ground in terms of the contract number on year average versus the guaranteed money. Give him a lot of front-loaded guaranteed money for 2 to 3 years. Make that cap hit or make the number look like something he'd be thrilled with. But really, when you see the final breakdown of it, it might be a win for the Bills based on how important he is to this team.
What's the AAV where you're out? I mean, if it comes in at $12.5 million per season,
I'm good with that.
You're good with that.
I'm good with that because he is not just a running back in my eyes. He's a weapon to this team in the ways that you can utilize him. I know he's had some drop issues in years past, but you can line him up in the slot, line him up outside. We saw that this year. He answered a lot of questions, too, from the running perspective of between the tackles and taking on contact, keeping his balance. So he checked a lot of boxes for me. 12.5 is probably, though, where I bulk anything higher than that.
Yeah, I also think that his size, I know he added some size, but the style of play and his willingness to be physical, even though he plays at a lower percentage, that's where I get a little bit worried at the $12.5 million number. Because if he goes out for any significant amount of time at that $12.5 million number, maybe not next season, but maybe looking ahead to 2026, that worries me a little bit when you're putting that much money, especially considering they're probably going to have to give a little bit more to their quarterback, Josh Allen.
Absolutely. The good news for the Bills, though, and for the rest of the league is that cap just keeps going up and up. And that's the reason why I think like 12.5 could be that sweet spot for both sides, meeting in the middle, so to speak, because you know that cap situation is going to continue to rise. And, with 10 picks in this year's draft, you're hoping that you're going to hit on a few of them and have them on rookie deals for the next 4 seasons.
I'd rather them go with a couple 12 to 15 to $18 million contracts on the defensive line and continue to draft rookie running backs, keep them on a cost control situation in that room. And listen, I'd like to see what Ray Davis looks like with a larger workload. Like, he was really good in a small sample size last season, and that's what also gives me a little bit of hesitation. Are we having a different conversation if 5 of those touchdown carries that Cook had last season go to Ray Davis, and now we're talking about a little bit more of a split in the scoring department? I think that they have big plans for Ray Davis, and that's one of the reasons why maybe picking up a day 2 or day 3 running back in this draft class, re-signing Ty Johnson, letting James Cook go into a true contract year, and kind of seeing where the dice roll.
And, I could see the Bills doing that. This is a pretty good running back draft class. You can find some guys in the middle rounds that I think would fit this system. Ray Davis looked really good in his one lone start when James Cook was out. They loved Ty Johnson. I think if they could find the right number for him, they would bring him back in a heartbeat. The Bills don't seem willing to make Cook an every down back, which Cook this offseason in an interview with Shannon Sharp and Chad Johnson said he kind of wants to be an every down back. I don't know if that's ever in the game plan for the Bills, which is another reason they probably don't want to go too high on his, AAV.
We are here at Wingnuts in Cheektowaga, right by the airport. Ryan Talbot, Matt Parrino, the Shout Buffalo Bills podcast. If you're one of the 1,100 people watching across all the platforms, and especially those on YouTube, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel as well. You can also become a Shout Buffalo Bills insider. Text 716-528-6727. It is a 2-week free trial, $3.99 a month after that. And speaking of the insiders, Mark, you ready to come up here, buddy? Come on up. Oh, he's finishing his wings. He's got to use the wet naps. I understand. So what else you got?
Well, I'm going to tell you right now, he came prepared. He showed me he has 2 questions on his phone ready to go for us.
All right.
So it looks like he's actually finishing up right now, but
he showed up early.
He did.
He got here at like 5 o'clock, got himself a seat, front row. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
5 o'clock a.m. Okay, good. We have that.
Sitting in the parking lot.
Now, what do you do combine-wise as a viewer? Like, are you watching them run? Are you watching the clips on social media? Come on in.
I watched a little bit of it today,
Yeah.
the wide receivers. But for the most part, I'm just looking at the account math bomb with the relative athletic scores, or the raw athletic scores. I'm into that because the Bills have had a tendency of going after highly athletic players, but I don't watch the combine the way that I used to.
What's up, Boom Boom? How you doing, buddy?
Doing good. Loving Wingnuts. Loving the new place. Loving the new place. My wife's got my phone, so I can't use my notes.
Oh my gosh, she took your notes away? Come on.
Got my phone, see?
Well, you got two phones out there recording. I like it. All right, you remember. You committed it to memory.
Anyways, I do have two questions. One, I know you talked to Brandon Beane this week. How aggressive do you think he's going to get in round one to get that defensive home record that we need? And my second question is the wide. I can't see that. Are you crazy? Yeah, right. I'm 61 years old. I can't see that. Anyways, the wide receiver position, that speedy, deep threat that Josh Allen needs. Do you think Brandon Beane's going to go through free agency or the draft to get that? And which one do you think is better, free agency or the draft?
I am not a fan of this free agent class, wide receiver wise. The top guy out there, well, in the draft, in the free agent class is probably Hollywood Brown. And the problem there is I think he can make plays down the field for you when he's available. And we've seen it year after year. He just isn't available enough. The more I watch Matthew Golden, the more I'm into the pick. I just don't think now that he's necessarily going to be there for the Bills. What do you think?
No, I agree with that completely. Free agent class is not inspiring, as you mentioned. Hollywood Brown, Amari Cooper, who the Bills had in here for half the season, really didn't produce well. I could see the Bills trying to come up with some middle ground there, but Joshua Palmer's, players like that, I like them. The money has to be right. Far from a guarantee, though, that you're going to hit a home run with a player like that.
So we got here, like I said, at 5 a.m., drove in from Syracuse. It's always worth the drive, buddy.
So how excited were you? You usually cut a promo on Patrick Mahomes when you come up here. How excited were you in the Super Bowl when they lost?
I wanted the shutout. I really wanted this shutout. I didn't want to see him score it all. And when he pouted with his little bottom lip out, I was loving life.
Are you surprised that Travis Kelce is coming back next season? I really thought he might retire.
No, I thought he'd come back for one more year. I knew he would have one more year in him. And then I think him and Taylor are going to go do their own little home life thing. So,
all right. So your first question, let's hit that before you get out of here. How aggressive will Brandon Beane be in the first round? I think we have a chance to see him be very aggressive because this draft is kind of funny. If one of the guys that he has a first round grade on is sitting there at like 20 or even in 15 and they love him and there's a huge drop off, if the Bills have a couple of picks and they can get rid of one of those twos to get up and get the guy that they're really excited about, whether it be a pass rusher or a wide receiver, right? I think that we could see them get really aggressive. He has shown in the past that he's willing to do it. Now, do you think he'll have any cold feet knowing the last two times that he did it, Kincaid and Elam, we're still waiting to see the returns on those?
It's a loaded question when you think about it, because there's been times where he's stood pat and he's had other teams trade over him, the Trent McDuffie draft. There's been times he's traded down, and there's already been some backlash on that. Mahomes and Xavier Worthy. So
Mahomes wasn't Beane, though.
No, it was not. And you're right on that. And also the Bills weren't necessarily in a market that year with a GM of Doug Whaley at that point, who was kind of just like waiting until after the draft was over for them to fire him. But you've seen all three scenarios play out for Buffalo since 2017 with Sean McDermott. I think he needs to get aggressive if there's a guy that he loves. There's a lot of people clamoring last year for Brian Thomas Jr. We don't know how much the Bills liked him or not. You loved him, I know.
I was clamoring. I was telling everybody that would listen.
And you
go
saw
up
how
and
he
get
performed.
Brian Thomas Jr. He might end up being the best wide receiver in this class. You could have had him for a similar trade up that they did the previous years.
I'm glad we got Keon Coleman. I think when he gets into a mold, I think he's going to be totally fine. But I really thought Beane was going to trade up to get that wide receiver that we needed, and especially somebody with some speed to give Josh Allen that deep threat that everyone's looking for.
Yeah, but after the Super Bowl, I think you see the blueprint. You saw it with the Tampa Bay Super Bowl. You saw it with the Philly Super Bowl. You need to be able to get after Mahomes consistently. So if there is an edge rusher or a defensive tackle sitting there in the 20s that you covet, that you love, despite it being a very deep D tackle draft, you go up and get your guy.
Yeah, because, if Brandon Beane paid attention to the Super Bowl, Philadelphia's defense, they were on little Mahomey like white on rice. Yeah, I had to drop him a homie, but they were all over him, and that's what we need to do. I mean, we need to just disrupt his game. Yeah, any team we play, just to disrupt them.
Thanks for coming out, brother.
No problem. Love it.
All right, we'll see you soon. Give it up for Mark.
As always, go Bills.
There you go. All right, we gotta have a little Christian Benford talk. Get up here, buddy. Yeah, he's not looking at me. He's like, we were talking a little while ago. So we had a really long conversation about Christian Benford before we started this podcast. First of all, how are you?
I get the mic from the big guy.
Yeah, you get the mic from the big. You got to eat it. You got to get it right up in your face there.
All right, here we go.
So your take on Christian Benford? It's a little bit of a bold take, but I think we'll see. Drop it on us.
I just think this guy has the capability to be better than Trey White has ever been for this team.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing he does that Trey, and I don't mean this to be a knock on Trey. I love Trey. Sorry, I was a little far from the mic there.
That's okay. Yeah, you just got to eat it.
He's just like such a willing tackler. He's so solid in run support. And like, just because you're not getting like 9, 8, 10 plus picks, you don't need to be Trayvon Diggs and like have like the boom or bust. Like, it's all about just being like Mr. Consistent, dependable. And he just like, I really listen to you guys a lot. I listen to Joe Marino a lot, and just like hearing about his coverage grades and just like he very rarely yields like more than like 30, 40 yards a game.
Mm-hmm.
And like, that's what you need. Like, I really think like he's even better than top 5 in the league right now before he gets this extension.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think he's better right now than Jalen Ramsey is.
I totally agree with that.
Like, I know Ramsey is an all-pro in the past, but like as the style of player at this moment, he's better than Jalen Ramsey. I'm not saying he's better than the defensive player of the year right now in Surtain. Oh, I'm not going to say number 1, but he's better than him. And I'm trying to think of other guys right now in the league. I think he's better than Sauce Gardner. He's way better for like a run support defender than Sauce Gardner is. So just an all-around player. Like, right now, I know it's probably going to take some time because this isn't the Shakir extension. This is not like the James Cook negotiation, which I'm not knocking you at all. I'm firmly on your side with this. I do 12 and a half, a little rich for me there. But like probably 10 or which he's not going to take right now.
Right.
But that's where I would sit on that. But he's not like the Shakir extension. He's not the James Cook conversation. Like, he's going to be one of the highest paid players in this team.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he should be. I think he right now is the second best player on this team.
Ooh.
Behind Allen, I would say.
I like it. You're dropping just spicy bombs on here. I like it.
Hawkins and Brown are up there.
Yep.
I think he's right now like
about
Benford.
Okay.
He's so about the process. He's just like, use that word. I know.
So it's funny. Like, this is a really important side conversation because you bring up James Cook. This is the first time we've really heard from him, period. Like, since they drafted him.
True.
No, I mean,
True.
He's been about as quiet a person. They have like a series on Bill's social media
He doesn't give you
where he
anything.
says like one sentence and it's like they make a whole piece of content around it every week.
Yeah.
So I think this whole James Cook thing is misunderstanding.
Yeah.
I think it is his people, his representatives, his brother that are going on the offensive to try to get the money, because at the running back position, it is an uphill climb to try to get this kind of deal, especially for a guy that's not playing the kind of snaps that I think typically you would need to. So I don't necessarily think I'm dinging Cook as much, but I do agree with you in that Benford is the
Yeah, I'm going to do it a third time.
There we go. I
All
think we're
right.
back. There we go.
So, as I was saying here, I'm right along with you in terms of Christian Benford, his importance to this team, the amount of money I'd be willing to pay him because lockdown cornerbacks are hard to find. They found a gem out of Villanova. I mean, Christian Benford, late in the draft, he's someone that I would definitely give that money to. Having a guy that can lock down one side of the field is really important, and we saw that he can do this at a high level. He fits the culture perfectly. He doesn't say much, but he proves his worth on the field every week.
I think they're really lucky that they lucked out with him. He was supposed to be the depth guy. We all know Kyrie Elam was supposed to be this guy that we're talking about in this sense. So I think they're really thinking like, wow, we saved ourselves here. Like, thank God we drafted this guy as a buffer. But I'm much more in favor of like this signing, like whenever this happens in the spring or like the summer before the season, than even like the Greg Rousseau talk. And I don't have anything bad to say about that guy, really. But I just think that like what he brings to the team, down in, down out, and the impact he makes on this defense, like he is the building block for this next phase for Sean McDermott for sure.
It's funny, the Greg Rousseau conversation has changed for me quite a bit this playoffs. Like, if you listen to the show, I was a very big proponent of getting that extension done before the number really exploded. And I just think year after year, when you don't have the kind of impact from that player at that position in the biggest games, I still think if you can get a good deal done, if you can get him under $20 million per season, I think you sign up for that because he's still a developing player and you want to add more on that defensive line. But I think I'm more with you at this stage in that I think they should prioritize Benford over anybody else that is up for an extension at this point.
Yeah, I can't, I'm not making this line up, but like I think I heard this from Lockdown Bills too. Like Rousseau is a Robin, he's not a Batman. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like you can be a great number 2 on the end, but we don't need that guy. Whoever that guy is, whether it's in the draft and he develops or we trade for him, hopefully at some point this offseason, whoever that may be, insert name. But I want him here too. But like, I'm all about now that Shakir's done, give me that number 1 corner, like lock him up before, because this is going to get really stupid expensive if you don't do this offseason, which I have no doubt they will. It's just a matter of time.
So crush it, man. Thank you so much. Appreciate you coming out. All right. We got one more little guest before we get out of here. Come on in here, honey. It's my daughter's birthday weekend. Just came from her birthday party. Come here. You want to stay with me? Just don't get that on my, just don't get your chicken wing on my shirt, and don't touch my shirt either. You're touching my shirt. All right. So what do you got for us today, babe? You don't know. You just asked me if you could come on. Did you just want to come on and say hi? Yeah. Okay.
Just a little screen time.
Just a little screen time. Who do you think what do you think the Bills are going to draft this year? A wide receiver first or a defensive lineman? Say it in the microphone. Say it really loud. Papa said it too. Defensive lineman.
I can't say that.
Oh, she said she can't say defensive lineman. Just go with wide receiver.
What?
Say wide receiver.
What's that?
What's that? All right. We're going to probably wrap it up at this point. How's your chicken wing, babe?
Good.
Good? Good. There we go. All right. For Ryan Talbot, I am Matt Parrino from Wingnuts, the new location right by the airport. Make sure you get out here. It's one of the hottest spots in town. They got deals. They got wings. It's awesome. We'll see you next time. Take care, everybody. Bye.